While I bought my little fixer-upper in Crestwood Heights, I envisioned a simple transformation: fresh cedar siding, sleek modern windows, and a cozy deck extension just big enough for a grill and a couple of Adirondack chairs. I'd spent months sketching plans, researching materials, and double-checking every detail against the Crestwood Heights Homeowners Association guidelines. I wasn't about to give anyone a reason to complain, not the county inspectors, and certainly not the HOA. My permits were pristine, alphabetized in a navy blue binder I kept on the entryway table, and I'd even printed out the email from the HOA board granting approval, signed by all 5 members. I thought I'd covered every base. What I hadn't anticipated was Evelyn Voss. Evelyn had lived in Crestwood Heights for 2 decades, and in her mind, that tenure made her the neighborhood's unofficial queen. I met her the day I moved in 4 years ago. She knocked on my door with a brittle smile, her ash blonde hair pulled into a tight chignon, and handed me a spiral-bound copy of the HOA bylaws that weighed as much as a small dog. "We keep things civilized here, Daniel," she'd said, her voice clipped and her hazel eyes sizing me up like I was a stray cat she might have to shoo away. "I make sure of that." I nodded politely, thanked her for the welcome, and assumed that was the end of it. I was wrong. The trouble started on a crisp October morning, the kind where the air smells like fallen leaves and possibility. My contractors, led by Javier, a soft-spoken guy with a knack for precision, had been hammering away for barely an hour when I heard the uproar. From my upstairs office, I peered out the window and saw her, Evelyn, striding across my lawn in a tailored navy blazer and knee-high boots, her arms flailing like a conductor gone rogue. Javier stood there, hands on his hips, his crew frozen mid-task, their nail guns dangling awkwardly. Even from a distance, I could hear her voice slicing through the quiet morning. "This is an outrage. You can't just rip apart a property in my neighborhood without my say-so." I grabbed my binder and bolted downstairs, stepping onto the porch just as Evelyn turned her wrath on Javier. "I've already alerted the board," she snapped, jabbing a manicured finger toward my house. "This stops now, or I'll have a sheriff out here in 10 minutes. Javier shot me a look that said, "Save me," and I stepped forward, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Good morning, Evelyn," I said, keeping my tone light despite the adrenaline pumping through me. "Is there an issue with my approved renovation?" I let the word "approved" hang in the air, a gentle reminder of the paperwork she'd signed off on herself. She blinked, caught off guard for a split second, but recovered fast. "Daniel," she said, spitting my name like it was sour milk, "this isn't what we agreed to. That siding gets cedar, not pine, and the color's all wrong. And this deck," she gestured wildly at the half-framed structure, "it's practically a monstrosity. It's throwing off the whole street's aesthetic." I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the PDF of the approval, and held it up for her to see. "Page 4, Evelyn. Cedar siding, autumn drift shade, and the deck's exact dimensions 12 by 16 feet. All signed off by the board. I've got the emails too, if you want to check those." My voice stayed steady, but I could feel my pulse in my ears. Something about her smug certainty made me want to push back harder, so I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, hitting the record button as I did. "Call it a hunch." Evelyn's lips pursed, and a flush crept up her neck. "Well, the board's reconsidered," she said, crossing her arms. "I've had multiple calls from neighbors worried about their property values plummeting because of this eyesore." She waved a hand at my house like it was a landfill. I glanced around. The street was empty, no nosy neighbors, no pitchforks. Just Evelyn and her imaginary army. "Which neighbors?" I asked, tilting my head. "And which rule am I breaking? Because I've got the bylaws memorized, and I'm pretty sure aesthetic harmony doesn't give you carte blanche to shut down a permitted project." She straightened, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. "Section 9, Paragraph 4. Exterior changes must align with the community's character, and as president, I decide what that means. This doesn't cut it." She turned to Javier, who'd been quietly directing his crew to pack up tools. "And you keep working, and I'll have you arrested for trespassing. I know people, and I'll make sure you never swing a hammer in this county again." That was a line she shouldn't have crossed. I felt a hot spike of anger, but kept my face neutral. Evelyn, Javier's here on my property, with my permission and county permits. That's not trespassing. Here, take a look. I flipped open the binder and held out the county approval, but she didn't even glance at it. Permits mean nothing if I say they don't, she shot back. I'm calling the sheriff unless they're gone in 5 minutes. She yanked her phone from her purse, her fingers hovering over the screen. I nodded, slow and deliberate. Okay, Evelyn. I'll pause the work for today. We'll figure this out. I turned to Javier. Take a break, guys. I got this. His shoulders sagged with relief as his crew started loading the truck. Evelyn smirked, thinking she'd won, and I walked her to the curb, keeping my voice low and calm. I respect your passion for Crestwood, but threatening my contractor? That's not sitting right with me. Sounds like it could be illegal issue interference with a business contract. Maybe. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, her perfume sharp and floral. Are you trying to intimidate me, Daniel? Because I promise you, that's a fight you'll lose. My brother-in-law's a county commissioner, and my husband's on a first-name basis with half the judges in the state. I can bury your little project in red tape until you're begging me to let it go. I smiled thin and tight. Not intimidating, just clarifying. I'll look into it and get back to you. She huffed, muttered something about uppity newcomers, and climbed into her gleaming black sedan. As her taillights disappeared around the corner, I pulled out my phone and called my sister, Lauren, a real estate lawyer with a knack for untangling messes like this. I played her the recording, and she let out a low whistle. Dan, she's handed you a gold mine, Lauren said, laughing. Threats, abuse of power, name-dropping connections she might not even have. That's harassment with a side of extortion. Give me a day, I'll help you build a case that'll make her regret ever stepping on your lawn. The next 24 hours were a blur. I dug through my files, pulling every email, every approval, every scrap of evidence. I knocked on doors and got written statements from 2 neighbors' misses. Carter, who'd once been fined by Evelyn for planting unapproved roses, and Tom and Gwen, whose pergola project had been stalled for 6 months over a non-existent rule. I combed through the HOA bylaws and found the smoking gun. Approvals couldn't be revoked without a full board vote and 30 days' notice. Evelyn had been freelancing her authority for years, and people were too scared to Toretto call her bluff. When Evelyn showed up the next morning, she wasn't alone. She dragged along 2 board members, Greg, a retired accountant with a perpetual frown, and Marisol, a quiet woman who always seemed to defer to Evelyn. They stood on my driveway, Evelyn clutching a manila envelope like a trophy. Daniel, she announced, her voice dripping with triumph. The board held an emergency meeting last night. Your project's officially dead. Here's your cease and desist. I took the letter, skimming it as she gloated. Thanks for this, I said, then looked up with a small smile. Before you go, I've got something for you all. I pulled out my phone and hit play. Evelyn's voice filled the air sharp, threatening, unmistakable. Greg's eyebrows shot up, and Marisol shifted uncomfortably as the recording rolled on. The trespassing threat, the boast about her connections, the promise to ruin Javier's livelihood. When it ended, the silence was thick enough to choke on. Evelyn, I said, keeping my tone even, I filed a police report yesterday about your threats. I've also sent this recording, along with a complaint, to the DA's office interference with a lawful contract and misuse of HOA power. Oh, and I've requested an emergency board meeting to review your conduct. Seems like there's a pattern here. Her face went white, then red. You recorded me? That's illegal. Not in a one-party consent state, I replied. And not on my property. The bylaws don't ban it either, I checked. I turned to Greg and Marisol. I've got statements from other homeowners, too. You might want to look at those before this escalates further. Greg cleared his throat, his voice gruff. Daniel, well, we'll need to discuss this. We didn't know about all of this. Marisol nodded, avoiding Evelyn's glare. Evelyn's composure shattered. This is absurd. I've spent years keeping this place from turning into a slum. And you're siding with him? A nobody who's been here 5 minutes? She spun on me, her voice rising. You'll pay for this, Daniel. I'll sue you into the ground. I shrugged. You're welcome to try. I'll see you at the meeting. 3 weeks later, the Crestwood Heights Community Center was packed. Folding chairs lined the room, and the air buzzed with tension. Word had spread, and neighbors I'd barely spoken showed up with their own tales of Evelyn's tyranny. Fines for ugly, mailboxes, vetoed paint colors. Even a rumor she'd once tried to ban a kid's lemonade stand. Lauren sat beside me, her briefcase open, as we presented our case recordings, emails, bylaws, witness statements. The DA's office had already launched an investigation, and the board, minus Evelyn, looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. When it came time for the vote, the tally was swift. 5-0 to remove Evelyn as president and from the board entirely. A second motion passed to reimburse my legal fees and issue an apology. As the gavel fell, Evelyn shot to her feet, her designer scarf slipping off one shoulder. "This is a disgrace," she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. "I've poured my life into this community, and you're throwing me out for him? You'll all regret this, I promise you that." She pointed at me, her fingers shaking. "You especially, Daniel. This isn't over." She stormed out, the door banging shut behind her, and the room exhaled. Greg, now interim president, approached me afterward, looking sheepish. "We let her run wild too long," he admitted. "Thanks for standing up. Most of us wouldn't have." I nodded, but my mind was already drifting. The renovation was back on track. Javier's crew returned the next day, hammering away like nothing had happened. But Evelyn's parting words stuck with me. A week later, a for sale sign went up in her yard, and I heard through the grapevine she'd moved to a condo downtown. Some said she was plotting revenge. Others figured she'd finally met her match. Either way, Crestwood Heights felt lighter without her shadow. As I stood on my finished deck that spring, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise, I couldn't help but smile. The siding glowed in the morning light, the windows gleamed, and the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, even. Evelyn might have thought she'd owned this place, but it turned out the rules mattered more than her reign ever did. And for the first time since I'd moved in, Crestwood Heights felt like home. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.